Okay, so Scott, if you don't know him, so a short introduction. So he's the Vice President, Chief Scientist of Disciplined Agile at PMI Institute and leads the evolution of the Disciplined Agile Toolkit and is an international keynote speaker and co-creator of the Disciplined Agile Toolkit. And he was maybe the first person I contacted when I started Architectural Thinking Association 3 years, and I was quite nervous when he replied, because Scott is also one of the heroes of my juvenile days. So when I was a junior developer, everybody read the Object Primer. So if you're in the software development world, you read this book in the 90s. So I'm more than happy and honored to have the opportunity to work with him on Architectural Thinking Association. And Scott is also a member of the core team of the Intersection Group. And that's why I'm excited to have him today to discuss the connection between the design world, the maybe higher level strategic enterprise design, with the bloody reality of realization. That's what I like to call it. And the idea of the session is that Scott gives a short talk. So he has a few slides prepared about his toolkit. So we'll tell a bit about it. And I have a few questions prepared. I will interview him afterwards, and then we will have maybe 40 or 50 minutes of open discussion with him. We are really keen on diving deeper in the relation between enterprise design, agility, enterprise design realization. That's why I'm happy to have and to hand over to Scott.
Okay, so thank you very much. I'll do my best to share once I have.
You need permission.
Yeah, I need permissions. Yeah, it's always harder than it needs to be.
Yeah, now we have it.
Okay, there we go. Okay, speaking about harder than it needs to be. Okay, hopefully you can, it always gets in the way. Okay, so hopefully you can see my slides. Okay, so what I wanted to do was just do a phenomenally quick overview of Dyspn Agile and some of the ideas and techniques and some of our thoughts around business agility and what all this stuff means. And the reason why I do this is because this is a very deep topic, and I'm going to show you some very detailed slides, which I'm going to just kind of breeze through. These slides will be available to you. Okay, I've already given a PDF of them to Wolfgang, so he'll get them on the site and get them out to you, so you don't need to, write madly. Oops. So first idea is Dyspn Agile is a toolkit. It's not a framework. So we often get compared to say for Scrum or some of the Agile scaling frameworks, and we really aren't. And the main difference where the frameworks tell you what to do, they give you a bundle of best practices and say, go and do this. This will solve your problem. We don't take that approach in DA. Instead, what we do is we walk you through, here's what you need to think about. Here are the issues you need to address. Here are your options. And here's how you make, and here are the trade-offs of them. So you need to decide what strategy, what way, you need to determine your own way of working, because everybody is unique. Every person, every team, every organization is unique. And you should have a fit for purpose way of working. One size does not fit all. And so this is our approach now, and I'll walk you through how we do that, but it's a little more sophisticated than, well, it's a lot more sophisticated than the frameworks. So, and we think that this is really what organizations need and individuals need in order to really sort of improve the way that they're working. Because if you look at the results of adopting these frameworks in the industry, it hasn't worked out so well. Things have improved slightly, but it's certainly not these wonderful promises that we've been told about. And some organizations have really benefited, but for the most part, on average, it's not working out as well as we'd like. And I think it's because of the limitations of the frameworks. And I think people, when they talk about agile transformations, they really talk about adoption of a framework, and that's a completely different thing than a transformation. So anyway, so, you know, thought I'd throw that idea out there. This is an overview of the DA mindset. What happened about 2 years, you know, we used to base the, you know, a lot of people in the Agile community will point to the manifesto for Agile software development as, you know, this defines the Agile mindset. Well, that's nice. It was a great start. Certainly 20 years ago, it was a heck of a thing, but it focused on software. It addressed problems of 20 years ago. And we've learned a few things since then. And we're also applying it beyond, you know, we're applying Agile far beyond the scope of software development. So about 2 years ago, we decided, you know, we stepped back and for years in the DA community, we had actually extended the manifesto for business agility, but it was sort of clunky. It was a clunky way of doing it. And we stepped back and we said, you know what, how would we rewrite, you know, how would we describe the mindset knowing what we know now? And this is what we came up with. So instead of describing the mindset in terms of some values and principles, we instead decided, you know what, we believe in a collection of principles. Some of the critical ones here are, you know, context counts, choice is good, and we want to optimize flow. We're not, you know. So anyways, we believe in these principles. So because we believe in these principles, we make promises to ourselves and to the people that we work with. We're going to behave in new ways. And in order to fulfill these promises, we follow a collection of guidelines. And so what happened is, so a couple of things I want to point out. I'm not going to go into the details here, but this is mostly lean thinking in many ways, but it's also critical from an Agile point of view. So one of the principles is enterprise awareness. So instead of being focused on just the team, which is what Agile does, our philosophy is, well, wait a minute, we really need to be looking at the bigger picture. We need to at least look at the organizational picture, if not the overall ecosystem picture. Like, you know, how does my organization work with other organizations? So anyway, so it's about more than just being on a team. So it's a different mindset. So this is how we describe, you know, the foundational Dyspn Agile mindset. But we also choose to observe, and this is, I think, is a, you know, fairly straightforward concept, but I think it's fairly radical for the Agile community, is that it's not just about being Agile. It's not just about, you know, particularly it's not just about Agile software development. So we've chosen to observe that different groups of people have different mindsets. So the finance people come to the table with a different mindset than the enterprise architecture people, who have a different mindset than the data management people, who have a different mindset than the security people, and so on. And this, I think, is an interesting observation for Intersection Group, because this is what you're doing. You're trying to, you know, bring these various groups of people to the table and help them to work together more effectively. And one of the challenges is all these groups of people have different priorities. They have different backgrounds. They have different ways of looking at the universe. And so they don't all come to the table with the exact same mindset. And this is one of the reasons why it can be very beneficial for them to work together, but can also be a bit difficult for them to work together as well. So the Dyspn Agile mindset that I presented on the previous slide is, you know, sort of a foundational, here's like a shared mindset, but we also recognize that each of these groups, each of these business functions, whatever you want to call them, we actually call them process blades or process areas, and we'll talk about that in a second. They have their own philosophies that extend the mindset, the DA mindset, in order to have, you know, to reflect their unique positions, and that's perfectly fine. So there's some similarities and there's some differences. So the scope of DA, as I mentioned earlier, is not just Agile software development. It's not just Agile, by the way. So in many ways, DA is misnamed. It's a hybrid. It's not just Agile. So we've architected the toolkit into 4 layers. The first layer is what we call foundation. This is where the mindset is. This is where fundamental concepts from Agile and Lean and even Serial, you know, the traditional ways of working, plus, you know, people stuff, and of course, you know, how do we actually go about this choosing your own way of working stuff. So building upon the foundation layer, the next layer up is Dyspn DevOps. So this is enterprise class DevOps. Virtually every organization now is a software organization. Even organizations that deal with tangible things like bits, like atoms, like construction companies that build bridges and houses and office towers, there's still software involved. And sometimes the software is the competitive advantage for these companies that you would think, a cement company, for example, their primary competitive advantage might be their logistics software, because if you need to get the cement truck to the right place in the right time to do, if you know anything about construction, you've got constant pour. So the constant pour concept, which is critical, is requires some pretty interesting logistics. So you'd better you're gonna have to have your software act together. So anyways, amongst other things. So Dyspn DevOps tends to be a critical thing for most organizations, and our approach is to bring all aspects of DevOps together, and because that's what we're doing. That's what our enterprises have to do anyways, right? So it's not just about DevSecOps and data DevOps and this DevOps and that DevOps. It's really about DevOps and how does it all fit together. Building upon that are value streams. So how do we bring products and services to market for our customers, and how do we delight them, and how do we continue to do so in order to fund the fund the value stream, but also to fund the rest of the organization. And then, of course, there's the rest of the organization. So how do these other supporting functions or critical functions fit in to the overall into the overall picture to support these value streams? So these hexes are what we call process blades. Sometimes some people call them key, process areas, or even key process areas, but those are reasonably loaded terms, so we try to avoid them. So we use the term process blade, but anyways, if you want to call them process areas, go ahead, I guess. So the idea here is that these, and if these are groups within your organization, or could be departments, depending on how, of course, how you're organized, or could just, be guilds, or, whatever you're doing. And that's all perfectly good. The idea here is that whoever is coming to the table with a finance, as a finance person or with a finance background, will work in a different way than people doing marketing, who work differently than the data folks, who work differently than the portfolio management folks, and so on. And yet we all need to collaborate. We all need to work together and learn from each other. So that's an absolutely critical thing. And how do we do so effectively? Because we don't want to locally optimize. We don't want to have these various groups or various teams all going in different directions, right? So we're all pulling in whatever direction we want to go in, but we, as an organization, we go almost nowhere because everybody's pulling differently. We really need to pull together as an overall team, as an overall organization. So we have different ways. So how do you choose your wow? How do you actually tailor your approach to meet your needs? Well, we can do this at different levels. So at one level, the easy level, I would argue, is the individual and team level. So how does a team figure out their best way of working, and how do they learn and evolve? And there's a lot of freewheeling advice out there, I would say. One of the common things a lot of the consultants will tell you is that teams should experiment with new ways of working, come up with ideas, experiment with them, and then see what happens. And that's fine. That's reasonably good, but we can be a lot smarter than that, because even though we're unique, and even though we face unique problems, the fact is that other people have faced very similar problems before in the past and have solved them. So with a little bit of humility, we realize that we can reuse strategies, we can reuse techniques from these various bodies of knowledge, and where and websites, and wherever it is techniques are described. So in DA, we help people to identify what these potential options are. So I don't know how well you can read this, but this is the address risk goal diagram, and this is basically in some ways it's like a decision tree, if you're familiar with that artifact. But basically, so instead of telling you here are the 5 best practices for addressing risk, we instead say, well, when you go to address risk, there's several things you need to do, several things you need to consider. What overall strategy are we following? How are we going to explore the risks, and so on. And then for each of these decision points or intents, we need to, you should choose one or more techniques, or have one or more techniques chosen for you, because sometimes senior management says, this is the way we do things here, done, right? Whether it's a good idea or not. So sometimes things are chosen for you, sometimes you get to choose. So choose intelligently. So, and then, so there's usually multiple ways that you can solve, that you can address a certain decision. So choose the ones that are right for you. So, and then in behind all this, and I'll show an example, I think on the next slide, our details, right? So what are each of these techniques all about? What are the trade-offs? So it's not just about, rah, here's this best practice, do it, be a good boy and do it. It's, well, here's this practice. There is no such thing as best practices, by the way. And here are the trade-offs. So if you do this, here's the benefits you'll probably see, but here are the side effects. Are you willing to live with that decision? So choose intelligently. So within a team or even at the personal level, this is pretty straightforward, right? Just, work together, talk it out, identify what you want to experiment with it, see what works for you. Next level up is across disparate teams. So if you remember the previous diagram with all the hexes on it, well, let's just say, for example, each of those hexes represents one or more teams. So my team has to work with it. So we might run into an issue, right? So we have to hire some people on, I need to hire a few people on my team, for example. In order to pull that off, I need to work with the financial people to get funding. And I need to work with HR to, help me doing the hiring and find the right people and, all that good sort of stuff, right? So how are we going to work together? Because we're different teams, right? The finance people, they want to do annual budgeting and whatever it is that they do. The HR people are, say they're order takers and they're barely, understaffed, underappreciated, all that good sort of stuff. So they're struggling. And meanwhile, I gotta get something built. I need more people on my team because, we've got a really hot product we want to get out the door. So we need to work together with these teams. So we need to negotiate a way of working. And in the case of the finance team, maybe I want to help them to become a little more effective from an Agile point of view. Maybe I just need to find out how I can, offload as much work or take on as much of the HR work onto our plates, because the HR people just are understaffed at the present moment for whatever reason. So we need to negotiate. And negotiating across these disparate teams is hard. If you don't know how to speak the language, what the priorities are, what their mindset is, work with them well, all kinds of stuff. This is a harder negotiation. This is a harder thing to choose your way of working with. Harder yet, or at least more interesting, and maybe the cursed sense of the word is, how do you do this across value streams, particularly when it's many teams working together in order to fulfill the needs of these customers or to hopefully delight them. How do we optimize across the entire value stream and optimize as well some of the supporting functions within that enable the value streams to do their thing? So this is even more complex, because now there's many people with many different points of view and many different priorities that we need to cope with. And then, of course, how do we do this across the organization? How do we get the entire organization to evolve and choose their way of working when there could be hundreds of thousands of people being affected and are being involved, I hope, in these decisions. So it's a higher level skill again. So anyway, so these are the types of things and strategies that we're addressing in the DA toolkit. Like in our certification program, we teach you how to do these things and apply the toolkit to make better decisions and to speed up and improve your approach to improvement. So let's work through a very quick example, then we'll go to the discussion. So earlier I was talking about this, this problem. My team needs funding for more people from this other team, we need to get finance involved to give us money to hire some people, basically. Unfortunately, finance wants us to put together a fairly detailed proposal with costs and other stuff. And we're also in the situation too that the reason why we're hiring is we're going on to a new release of this thing, whatever this product is that we're working on, and we got new features and a bunch of other stuff. So we got, not only do I have to fund 2 new people, I have to also get continued funding for my team. And then, whoever else, whatever else we need to buy stuff. Okay, so we need to get funding. So the funding people, the finance people want, a detailed upfront estimate. They want a fixed price. They're happy to take a little bit of a range on the estimate, but it's really not the most effective way of working. So the way you read these diagrams, and I should have pointed this out, whenever you see arrows beside the list, that's an indication that the strategies towards the top of the list are generally more effective than the strategies towards the bottom of the list. And that previous diagram had some ordered options and some unordered options. In this case, they're all ordered. So anyway, so the finance people, they believe in this fixed price approach, and good for them. That's what their mindset is. That's what their current process is. But we see that there's other options that are more effective than what they're asking for. So wouldn't it be nice if we could be allowed to experiment with better options that allow us to be more effective, and frankly also allow them to be more effective, even though they might not be completely aware of that yet? So the issue is one of, if we just throw a Scrum coach at this, you're probably going to go blah, 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 blah. Time materials is the only way to do funding. Otherwise, you're evil and you don't know what you're doing, right? The usual purist stuff. Well, no, it's one of several options, and it is better than fixed price. So I'll give them that. But unfortunately, I forgot to mention this. Unfortunately, in the past, our finance group had tried time materials, and they crashed and burned. It just didn't work for whatever reason. So now they don't really want to hear about time materials again, because they know it doesn't work. Right? This is what they believe. Like, that simply doesn't work because they're special, whatever their excuse is. So they don't want to hear about time materials. So if we just go to them and say, time materials is the way to do things in the Agile community, and if you don't like that, you're stupid and you're part of the problem. We're smarter than you, even though you've got a degree in finance, you've been doing this for 30 years, but we're smarter than you because I took a 2-day certification course. That message doesn't really go over well. So, and they, yeah, that's cute. No, we're doing fixed price, but thanks for trying to share. So instead, we need to have an intelligent conversation. So what we do, and by the way, and there's also nobody on my team that knows anything about finance, right? Other than, we don't like fixed price. So we need to have an intelligent conversation. We need to be able to negotiate. So we go to the toolkit. In this case, I've got a screenshot of the DA browser. You can see the arrow in the bottom there. Or you could, if you're a paper book person, you could look this up in the book as well. But anyways, so we go to the appropriate table describing the options on that previous slide. We see that the current approach, this fixed price range thing, it's not bad. It's better than doing an exact range or an exact fixed price quote. But it has some downsides. There's some trade-offs here. So that's some good things about it, one or two good things, a lot of bad things about it. Some of the strategies above, though, are generally more effective. Now, unfortunately, time materials doesn't work. If we try to go with time materials, that's probably not going to fly. But there's an interim approach, stage gate funding. So maybe we can try that. And that's basically big time, time materials with a big time frame. But maybe we could talk them into doing stage gates. So now let's have an intelligent conversation, talk about the trade-offs, and get them to, hopefully talk them into allowing just my team, not everybody, but just my team to experiment with the stage gate approach. They'll have to change the way that they work a bit, because now they've got to govern in a stage gate manner rather than a fixed price manner. So they have to keep an eye, and I hope they would really keep an eye on us, because, it's a new change. But also we need to then behave in a stage gate manner as well in this case. So both of us would change the way that we work to experiment with this new technique to see if it works for us in our situation. If that experiment's successful, then we would adopt it. And then maybe next time consider, hey, stage gate worked, world didn't come to an end. Let's take it up a notch, see if we can make time materials work now. And you know us, and we're fairly convinced that we can do it, and we've worked through how. Maybe that's possible. So we can have more intelligent conversations across disparate teams. And this is so sometimes a potential change is just at the team level. Okay, do what you need to do, experiment with it, see what happens. But very often it's a cross team thing. Now we need to have more intelligent coaching and more intelligent conversations. So basically, many of you, I would think, have probably seen how Agile struggles to get into struggles to get out of the software ghetto in your organization across and lean techniques and other techniques. And it's often because the the Agilists don't have the ability to have the conversation, also don't understand that what works well for software might not work so well for non-software. And that's a bit of an issue. So we try to help people understand this and teach them to, how can we actually improve and help the organization get better in all aspects of the organization, not just in software, not just at the team level. So, and then of course, so some of these techniques were better, some of these techniques were worse. Now that's only true for the ordered lists, the ordered ones. And roughly about half of the decision points are ordered and half are not. So just want to make that clear. So anyways, these are the slides I wanted to go through. There was a few big concepts or important concepts that I'll probably refer back to while we have our campfire talk.
Okay, so so thank you very much. I don't know why my video is not working, however.
I just stopped sharing, so that's probably going to do it.
Okay, however, I will ask you from the off. So one question, and that's the reason why I invited you also, and I'm happy that you joined in the intersection group, is I think your work is very much connected with the reality of realization. So you start with DevOps, also in the concepts you presented, you start at the DevOps level, at the development team. That's realization, that's what I used to say, blood on the dance floor. So that's the reality. Yeah. And with enterprise design, when I connected with the enterprise designers 2 years ago, they appear to be very high level above, about thinking about purpose and strategic things and how to form organizations, so that there might be light years between that. So what do you think, what must happen, and what should we do as intersection group to make this intersection and to be present in every software development team in the world, like Scrum, for example, is everywhere. Yeah, and what would it mean for us? What do we need to produce? What do we need to do to be there?
Yeah, definitely. So I think the example I gave was basically with a software. I didn't say it was a software team, but let's say it was a software team. It was some team and finance, right? I need to get money for finance to do whatever it is that I'm doing. So but that could have been the strategy group as well, right? The same principles hold. So if my team needs to work to understand the corporate strategy, to understand what changes that we're doing, or if they need to communicate their vision to the lower level beings in the organization, either way, that needs to be a coherent conversation. The development team, or whoever the team is, needs to understand, well, what the heck are these strategy people up to? Why should I listen to these guys? Why should I care? Right? It's like, you're in my way, and you're part of the problem. and that's unfortunately part of the purist mindset, is that management is part of the problem, and that the senior long-term planning or long-term visioning stuff isn't needed as part of the problem. I don't need to listen to these guys because frankly they're just useless overhead. Probably not the right attitude. So but this is what you need to overcome. At the same time, though, these teams, Agile or not, they need to hear concrete visions. We need to have a conversation that we can relate to. And if we can't hear, if I'm on a team and I'm trying to get something out the door, and the enterprise designers are coming along going blah 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 blah, it's like, I don't have time for that. Get out of my way. Like, you need to, I used to like to say, you need to get ahead of the train, because once the train leaves the station, I'm just going to run you over, right? Because I got to hit a date, I got to hit a deadline, I got to get something out the door. I don't need you changing things on me for something that might not be coherent. Certainly not coherent from a product point of view. So anyway, but so we need to have a two-way conversation, and we need to appreciate and respect on both sides of the fence what's going on. So from an intersection group point of view, how do you actually, if you're coming from, it doesn't really matter where, remember that diagram with the hexes on it. It doesn't really matter where you're coming from, right? Because you're in one hex and there's these 23 other hexes that you probably have to interact with in some way. So how do I interact with, if I'm in the strategy hex, how do I interact with the people in the portfolio management hex or the people in the security hex, right? That's the basic issue here. So we need to.
And I think that's very much related with our story of opening negotiation spaces. And I think this answer will very much resonate with many people in our community too, because that's really close to the discussions we've been having recently, that all we can do as enterprise designers is open spaces where people can meet and have better conversations and understand each other. And the maps, we are working hard on Milky Way and other enterprise maps, are a means to enable these kinds of conversations. Yeah? And we must be aware, and that's what makes me nervous, that they outnumber us by a factor of 100 probably. There are so many developers, and what I sense, there are so many brilliant software developers that are curious for the whole. So I know many senior software developers or something, they do domain-driven design. So they are curious about the business, yet they are not invited to the strategy. They are not invited in the process to define goals. They are not invited in the project scoping. So that's a lot of frustrations that I sense. So would you agree? I mean, they are not involved in those things.
And it's not just the developers too. It's also the business operations people, which outnumber the developers once again, right? So because because they've got to keep the lights on. They're currently doing whatever it is that they do in order to serve the customers. So there's this, you've got the higher level executives providing and long-term thinkers providing direction to the IT folks who are working with whoever they need to work with to produce products and services. But then those products and services are let loose out into the wilderness, and the business operations folks, who almost always outnumber everybody, they got to do what they got to do to serve the customers, right? And they've got their priorities. So they're dealing with like truly concrete issues, right? And it's strange. Like you talk to the business operations people, and they think the developers are just off in fantasy land doing whatever it is that developers do, and they're not concrete at all. And then the developers, they look at the strategy folks and they're thinking, wow, those guys are smoking something. So you get these differing levels of abstraction and priorities, and we need to appreciate that and learn to work together. So we need to have good negotiation spaces, and we need to have negotiations to begin with, and understandings. Like just last week, my team, which is mostly an IP development team, was working with a delivery team within the PMI, and they have dates. They've got my team is just one of many that they're working with, and my priorities are not exactly their priorities, and rightfully so. And the first part of the negotiation, if you wanted to call that, was we've got dates to hit. Leave us alone. And okay, and fair enough, right? And I know I've got a pretty good handle on their situation. I know what they're dealing with. But at the same time, there's some money sitting on the table here that we might want to collect. So we had to go, and fair enough, we came to a conclusion, but it took us, several days, it was a couple hours, but it was spread over several days. But it took us several hours to work it through. Here's how we're going to work together to do something that was on neither of our plans, but it has to be done, right? It's just, and it's higher, and in some ways it's higher priority than all these number one priority things that both of us have as well. So and this is just the reality for all teams and all organizations, right? We always rely, like there's this myth in the Agile community of autonomous teams, and it simply isn't true. It just isn't. Like my team is autonomous sometimes, but other times, like I need something done, I had to go work with this other team. We needed to negotiate, we needed to figure it out, and we needed to we're basically experimenting with a new way of working that I suspect will work. And if it does, then, it'll, become standard operating procedure until we change it again. But we're not autonomous. No way, right? My team can't get the job done. That other team can't get the job done by themselves. They can do their part of it, but we all have to work together because we're all part of an overall value stream. And which is part of an overall organization.
Yeah, so this very much connects to my next question. And in April, we had Chris Potts at his last Fireside talk, and you attended there. And he has a lot of experience in management consulting. He works a lot with executives and their realm and their way of thinking. And they think in goals, and they think in money, and they think where to invest, and so on. And on the other side, you have the developer. So it's a totally different world. And for me, in the middle, there's somehow enterprise design that deals with both stakeholders groups. So it's maybe it's design and the creations we come up with that enable the communications. But do you have tools in your disciplined agile toolkit that help executives to make better decisions or define better goals that then can be realized by the realization? So do you have any tools to connect the world of management with development?
Yeah, we do. So once again, you got all the hexes, right? So management tends to hit on several of those hexes: strategy, portfolio management, governance, a few others. And so there's various techniques in each of those areas. But the big thing is particularly mindset. In this case, like realizing that things are not carved in stone, that the world is not predictable. And I think the big challenge is that we all have a vision, we all have our priorities, we all have our preferred ways of working, and the senior executives, they'll, I hope, have a bigger vision, better understanding of the overall bigger parts and where they want to go. But at the same time, they're guessing, right? They have a vision of we need to go in that direction. They just don't quite know how they're going to get there, and the direction might, and then the target might change over time. What will change over time, not just might. So I think that is a frustrating thing. And then the people on the ground, they're in the exact same boat. Like they don't quite know what direction they're going in either, and it's going to change anyways, right? So with COVID, a lot of people have really woken up to the fact that the things can change pretty darn quickly, and pretty darn dramatically sometimes. So I think we've hopefully learned that change is real, and it's much more prevalent than we think. And so I suspect we've got to leave. We have to leave space, and we have to leave room to change and to rework things. So just a week or two ago, I was in a conversation with a CFO, and she's a bright lady. She's been doing this for a long time, really knows her stuff, and it's been a bit frustrating lately. Trying to budget and all that sort of stuff, and predict and try to predict the future. And basically, the 2020 financial plan was thrown out the window like 2 months into 2020, and then towards the end of the year, as her team was working on the 2021 stuff, they had hoped, well, things are going to calm down. COVID will be a lot. COVID will have gone away. Heck of an assumption there that I don't know what she was thinking, but anyways, heck of an assumption. And then sure enough, here we're more than a few months now, but but once again, a couple months into 2021, that budget might as well just have flushed it. And so she was, coming to us, coming to a bunch of people trying to get some advice of what to do. And well, it's, you really need to loosen up on your budgeting processes and realize you can't predict the future, right? You've got no hope of predicting what's going to happen a couple months from now. So why the heck are you planning out a year in advance? It doesn't make any sense, right? So understand what your actual horizons are, and then plan that far. And I know, yeah, she has fiduciary responsibilities and all that good sort of stuff. But at the same time, you got to be realistic, and you got to be prepared to change, right? And one of the big challenges was her team had spent months putting an annual budget and an annual forecast together that got thrown away after 2 months. So complete wasted effort. So at least now she doesn't want to, spend months again doing it for next year. So she can go to quarterly budgeting and experiment with that and see the world doesn't end. But this is the thing, right? We all need to be flexible, and we all need to challenge our assumptions and be willing to change and experiment and really understand what our boundaries are. Like one of the, I'll work with finance people and they say, well, we can't do that because, we're a publicly traded company and we have to report annually. Okay, doesn't mean you have to budget annually. Separate those two. There's two totally freaking different things. Separate them in your mind. Separate them, right? Stop using the one for an excuse. By the way, you actually have to report quarterly, but we'll talk about that after. Separate those, right? Two totally different things. And reporting should be a reasonably trivial thing, by the way. If you remember what Sarbanes-Oxley was supposed to be all about, but and it never is. But anyways, it should be. So yeah, we need to be smarter about what we do and be willing to actually deal with reality. I think in many cases.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. And my final one, and please, for the others, prepare some questions. I will just ask one more to get the party started, and afterwards you are responsible for keeping the party going. So that's my final question, and it's a big one because so this question, this big agility thing, right? There's business agility, and it came from the Agile manifesto, and some say there is an Agile community. I don't know what an Agile, what it is. Is it just software, whatever? So that there is this agility, whatever, business agility, but how is it related to enterprise design?
Well, I would argue that enterprise design should be about helping organizations to become more effective. So the business agility is also about that. Now, if in the strict purism sense of the world, where it's only about agile and all that good sort of stuff, but nobody really sees it that way, right? So when people talk about business agility, they almost always mean to become more of a lean organization, to start becoming and to apply agile concepts where they make sense, lean concepts where they make sense, and I would argue traditional concepts when they make sense as well, right? So you really have a hybrid. And it's really all about how do we design, and it's not really, how do we design and evolve our organization over time in order to reflect the context that we face and the direction that we want to go to, right? Because there's this day-to-day, we gotta continue moving and keep the lights on and serve our customers or serve our citizens in the case of a government agency. But at the same time, which way do we want to go? What are we all about as an organization? How are we going to make the world a better place? And I hope we want to make the world a better place. So, and how do we do that? And what direction are we going to go in? And I think so business agility and enterprise design, in my mind, should go hand in hand. I think the business agility folks could do with more enterprise design skills. I think the enterprise design folks could do with more on the ground, the bloody dance or whatever you called it, a little more. How do we actually implement and get our hands dirty? My wife is a landscape architect, and I interact with physical landscape architects every so often, but also physical building architects. And it's interesting. Those people the good ones are on site. The good architects are on site doing things. Now they might not be hammering wood and stuff like, or maybe they might be, but certainly they're on site. They're seeing their vision getting implemented. They're not just handing out, here's some blueprints. Good luck. Let me know how it goes. And some architects are like that, but many are not. And I think you need that hands-on, go off and do it experience as well as the think it through experience.
Yeah,
and you got to iterate back and forth.
Yeah, I absolutely agree to your point. So for me, this message that enterprise designers must also, and enterprise architects, that where I'm coming from, I also know many that don't have dirty hands. So it's always a danger that you work on this abstract level only and create beautiful maps, and you look to the ecosystem and you connect to purpose and on. But I see a danger if you are not there when things are realized, and if you don't understand the persona of the developer and the business people, then we're gonna fail. And that's why I invited you to this session also, because that's, for me, it's an important message. Okay, so yes, please. So I'm quiet now, and I'm hoping to hear many questions from you guys. Laurent, you can ask it, not just in the chat.
Yeah, okay, I will oblige. Is there a difference between a discipline agile value stream and a lean value stream?
Depends. So in Dyspn Agile, we don't insist that it be a perfectly lean value stream. Certainly, we would highly motivate you in that direction, but we recognize that like a value stream is a value, like whatever you're currently. Yeah. So our philosophy is you start where you are. So if you have a value stream going today, and all organizations have at least one, then it is what it is, right? That's how you're doing it. And how lean is that? Well, who knows, right? I hope it's, if it's not lean, or, if it's not reasonably lean, then then we can definitely help you to improve it. But you start where you are. So, and yet it's still a value stream, but it's not perfectly lean. So the answer is it depends. Yeah. So one of the other philosophies of DA as well is we don't prescribe things at all. So yeah, we're not going to say thou shalt be lean. We will definitely push you in that direction. But if you're not so lean for whatever reason, then that's okay too. That's the best you can do. So, so our full philosophy is start where you are, do the best that you can do in the situation that you face, and always try to get better. So if you're not perfectly efficient now, or effective now, then yeah, let's help you move towards being more effective for your current situation.
Great, thank you.
Hi, Scott. I'd love to have your opinion on the roles. So today we have these roles on solution teams, like the Scrum Master, the Product Owner. Does Dyspn Agile sees new roles coming in, or has an idea of that another different kind of way of organizing teams? Are you seeing these roles being overused or not applied in the right way?
Yeah, so definitely. So I didn't talk about roles at all, because that's a big topic. The quick answer is yes. So at the same, and so if we inch into prescription at all, it's probably in that area. So we do call out some potential roles. So we take some of the Scrum ones, but one of the things that's interesting is DA is a hybrid. So it's not just about Scrum, right? So it's a fundamental mistake to assume that the Scrum roles are applicable to all teams. It's observably not true. So for example, in Scrum team, and they've been going back and forth about this for years, what a Scrum Master is all about. It's, they've gone off into the flakier realm recently, I think, but Scrum Masters sort of lead, facilitate, guide teams, definitely not manage, or maybe not, depending on the situation. But anyway, so say some sort of a team lead. Well, that's appropriate for a Scrum team. It's not appropriate for a lean project team. It's not appropriate for a waterfall serial team, right? It's not appropriate, so a marketing team might be led by a marketing manager or the VP of marketing. The enterprise architecture team's led by a chief architect, not a Scrum Master, right? So we got to look beyond these methodologies that are trying to prescribe a single way of working, and realize, well, wait a minute, that makes sense in some situations, but not others. So we call out a team lead, which depends on, if you're a Scrum team, it might be a Scrum Master. If you're a project team, it might be a project manager. If you're an enterprise architecture team, chief architect, right? So or lead architect, there's different ways you can say that. But so we call out, we suggest a bunch of roles. Each of the process blades, those hexes, have some specific roles. So for example, security has security engineer. Data management has DBA and data architect and data manager, and probably a couple others that aren't coming to mind, right? So different domains have different sets of roles. We also don't limit ourselves to what the narrow view of the universe that Scrum has, right? So for example, Scrum purposely doesn't address technical issues. Well, it's inherently false. It's insane, right? So instead, what we do is we say, you know what, in software land, you have to deal with a few technical issues. So, not only do you have a product owner, perhaps, you might want to have an architecture owner to own the solution, to help guide the team in architecture decisions or technical decisions, or architecture decisions is a better way to look at it, because you're dealing with architecture issues. Another interesting thing, which the Agile community has completely got wrapped around the axle on now, is product owner. Product owner is one of many ways that you can represent the needs of your stakeholders into the team. It's a fairly decent one, but there are better ways of doing it. But because it's been prescribed by Scrum, and everybody's been trained in it, and now the safe guys are doing it and the less guys are doing it, everybody built it based on Scrum, which prescribes this role, and they're desperate not to use the word prescription, but it's prescribed. I would invite anybody to look the description of the word, look up the word prescription in the dictionary, and then have a conversation with me about prescription, please. So anyways, it's a prescribed role in Scrum, right? Well, that's only one of many options. It's okay, but you can do better than that. But how many people in the Agile community know that now, right? Because they've got the Scrum blinders on. So this is a huge challenge that you'll see in organizations. And this is one of the reasons why I think the Agile transformations haven't been going so well, is because of all the prescription. And because they're limited to just one way of thinking. And it's very difficult to get out of that way of thinking. This is one of the reasons why we're agnostic in DA, and we avoid the Scrum terminology, because we desperately want to help people to get the Scrum blinders off, to stop, to start thinking outside of the Scrum box. And it's amazing when you do that, you have a much better chance of improvement. But, Agile folks, gotta love them.
Thank you, Scott.
You're welcome.
And maybe one comment here. When I started with architectural thinking frameworks 3 years ago, at the beginning it was prescriptive like hell, and then we discussed, and what I've learned from Scott is context matters. And I think that's also, it was really a very influential quote you made, and we take it for intersection group, because for all of the tools we're gonna produce, the first section in this tool is, in what context does it apply? So my point here is, we must get better and better in understanding the context before we offer any advice. Any design patterns, they're always related on context, and for that reason we have an intersection toolkit and not an intersection framework, where I see it as people can combine the tools that they think that are applicable for their context, and that's a really huge shift. That's what I've learned from Disciplined Agile.
Yeah, well, thank you. But and what's interesting, I think one of the big problems with all these prescriptive frameworks and methods are that they effectively give you a hammer. And it's the old thing that, if all you have is a hammer, then everything looks like a nail. Well, what's even more insidious is that there's multiple types of hammers. So if you've only got a claw hammer, then you can only deal with certain things with a claw hammer. If you have to pound I recently had a fence put in. I didn't do it. I'm too old for this, or smart enough not to do this work. We had a fence post put in on at my cottage, and you got to use a huge mallet, like the big steel mallet thing, in order to pound the posts in. Right, that ball peen hammer is not going to get that job done. So this is, if all I've got is one of those big, huge, mallet things, then yeah, I can pound some posts into the ground and a few other things I guess I can do with that type of hammer, as opposed to like a finishing hammer for putting little nails in. So we got to be, but the problem is we don't want to, in the intangible world, like software and strategy and many other things, we often get frustrated by the fact that there's choices. In the tangible world of construction, it's a no-brainer that, oh yeah, I've got like 7 different types of hammers, right? And look at all these different screwdrivers that I've got, and all that sort of stuff, right? It's just natural because you get it, right? It's blatantly obvious that this little ball peen hammer is not going to hammer in a post. It's the wrong tool for the job. Yet in the previous gentleman was asking about the Scrum roles. It's blatantly not obvious that product owner is not the way to go in many situations for getting requirements out of the stakeholders and into the team, right? And because that's part of the religion. It's part of the Agile religion now. And they don't want to hear that, oh, that's just a ball peen hammer. What about these other 7 types of hammers that you choose not to even recognize? You can't even see because you've got your Scrum blinders on.
Yeah, and maybe the problem gets even more severe because each discipline has its hammer. The process guys, they have the process management tool, and the data guys, they have their data governance, I don't know, data science tools. So if you're a data guy, everything is data. So and you have some tools for that. And maybe that's exactly the paradigm shift we want to make with intersection. We take the best tools from various disciplines and offer them in the way that they are applicable, and like in the toolbox. So I like your metaphor with the toolkit, and you can pick whatever, but that also means, I think it also means for enterprise design and for the toolkit that we must offer some advice in what context would we use this tool. So there need to be some advice that, so if there is a novice enterprise designer, or if you are a builder, it's not a good idea to use a hammer for a different purpose. And so I think, and that's maybe the idea of the intersection toolkit. Yeah, there will be tools and there will be some advice, but the challenge will be to be not too prescriptive, because then it's a framework, and to leave choices based on context and respect the context and respect the wisdom of the people, because they know the context much better than any enterprise designer can ever know.
Well, yeah, and the situation will change too, right? So this is a huge challenge. How do you architect a toolkit, and how do you design something that's flexible, that will stand the test of time and easy to evolve, right? Because a year or two from now, there'll be new challenges that are being faced by organizations, and we'll need new tools and new strategies for dealing with that, and that should be brought into the toolkit and applied accordingly. So I think there's some very interesting challenges, and you can see that with some of the process frameworks and the scaling frameworks that are not generally architected, and either what happens is they become a dumping ground for great ideas, and there's like 1 or 2 toolkits. Now I won't name them, but I think it's, if you look at them, it's obvious what's happened there. Whereas others are fairly stagnant, and or at least they've defined their scope, and they don't really evolve outside of their scope, which is a smart thing in some ways, but it also limits them to what they're doing. So it's a hard thing. Like some of these methods and frameworks really haven't evolved that much in like 20 years. When you step back and look at what's actually been going on, not a lot of change there, which is unfortunate. But a smart move for them. So, I got to give them credit.
So, Scott, I think that one of the reasons that it's so difficult for people to work sort of across the boundaries is typically we don't understand each other. Transparency could be one of the main tasks of an enterprise designer, basically make sure that we understand each other. Is that how would DA relate to that?
Yeah, so I think that's what we're trying to achieve, right? So we describe each of these blades. So it's interesting, we get pushback from people. Either there isn't this wealth of information, like all the great and gory details that you'd ever want to know about vendor management, for example, or there's way too much information about vendor management. It's one of the two, right? And so that to me tells me that we've probably got it right. So what we want to do, I'll focus on vendor management for some reason. But so if you don't know anything about vendor management, like procurement, vendor management, all this stuff, then there's just enough information there for you to get an appreciation for what it's about, what you should be seeing happening, and why. Now, we're not going to train you to be a procurement officer or anything like that, right? We'll point you to the people who will do that, but we're not going to do that. But as an outsider to vendor management, there's more than enough information there for you to have a clue to have an intelligent conversation with them. And if so if you're coming from, data management, and the vendor management people now need to work with you for some reason, there's enough of a description about data management for them to get up to speed. So at least now you can appreciate where each other's coming from, and hopefully talk. We still need to have the attitude, yeah, I need to go talk to these people and learn about them and all this sort of stuff. But the other challenge, so I'm a firm believer in visibility. The problem with that is, do you know what you're looking at? So for example, yes, my wife's a landscape architect, right? So I have a little bit of a clue, but I don't really know. So there'll be some stuff, that she's working on doing, and I'll look at it going, okay, yeah, it makes sense. And I won't know what I'm looking at. And this, I think, is the big challenge. Like even metrics, which is a reasonably straightforward topic. I can't honestly say, like, all these fancy dashboards that we've been producing the last few years for people, I'm not convinced people really know what they're looking at. And the reason why I say that, I was involved with a study years ago where we actually, the researchers looked into that very issue. And the answer was that the executives didn't know what they were looking at. Now, maybe things have gotten slightly better since then, because at the time, dashboards were, these automated dashboards were a reasonably new concept, but I bet not. Because I'm involved in a lot of conversations where, we're looking at data and like, well, the information being generated by data. And I know that other people on the call don't understand the implications of some of these things that are happening, particularly when it comes to, once again, to software development, because I've got a deep background in software development and things. And so when you come from a certain domain, then you just know what's going on, right? So you can see the dashboards, and you can talk to people and get a vibe for what's going on. But if you don't have that background, it's just numbers on a screen, right? And that, I think, is the problem, that, because there's, laws of physics in each of these domains. And if you don't really understand these laws of physics for finance and for vendor management, and for software development, then getting visibility into what's going on there, it's better than not having visibility. But, well, that might be an assumption, but I hope it's better than not having visibility. But at the same time, well, actually, you know what? No, I don't want to say that, because I've been in situations where we've given visibility to people into what's going on these teams. And because they didn't know what they're looking at, suddenly they were trying to help. And I'll give them the benefit of the doubt that they were trying to help, but they were not helping at all. And we really regretted giving them any sort of insight into what the heck was going on, because they just didn't have a clue. And they were trying, but man.
So you prefer the service-oriented architecture with a black box approach, and nobody knows what goes on.
Yeah, it's a dangerous game. That's the thing. Yeah. If it's a total black box, then that's an issue. But being given visibility into something you don't understand, that's not the greatest. It's the old story around, you might enjoy eating sausage, but you don't want to ever see it getting created, because it's horrendous. So, but if you're an expert sausage maker, or an abattoir engineer, I don't know what the actual roles are there, but then, looking at the sausage making process is not a big thing, and you can say, oh, ooh, why are they doing that? That's stop that. You're going to kill us all. So it's an interesting world. So I think, the current generation of management probably needs to up its game on data, on all this data, all this new data intelligence stuff, and actually being able to being able to understand the numbers that they're getting, and making data-driven decisions, and acting on the visibility that they're getting. I think that's going to be a generation.
So the whole goal basically is to get people to work together somehow, right? Because we have different skills and different focus areas, but we need to act as an enterprise, sort of a well-oiled engine that just works. So that challenge, and I know that there's of course many different ways of doing that. We have flat organization, transparency, self-managed teams. There are tons of situations where we're trying things out. Do you see the enterprise designer or the enterprise architect as a role to get that enterprise to work as a machine, where sometimes it's a black box, sometimes it's transparency? I mean, if it's values and ideas and goals, it may have to be transparent, right? So if everybody understand it. But if it's the legal team, we may not all need to know everything there is to know about contracts and things like that. Is that an enterprise designer role, do you think, to make that work?
I'm not sure it would be. Making it work might not be the right term. I think guiding it, shepherding it, leading it, maybe leading might not be the right. It depends, I think, but certainly shepherding and guiding are words I would want to use there. Producing sandbox, putting together a sandbox that people can work in and play in and experiment in, where it's safe. I think that's an important thing an enterprise designer can do, because you don't really know. Like, you'll make a good guess that, hey, let's make this more transparent or less transparent. But we need to try it out and see. And if that works, then great, and you're a hero. But if it didn't work out so well because there was some unforeseen thing happened, or it was just too advanced for the people involved, or whatever the reason was, and you need to back that out, but that still needed to be a safe thing to try. And what DA is all about is helping you to identify strategies to experiment with that are more likely going to succeed for you in your situation right now, and reduce the failures. Because if you have too many failures, because a lot of people really struggle with the failure concept, and really struggle with this idea of experimenting. Just look at what's going on with COVID, right? Like, there's large portions of the population that struggle with science and the scientific process, like, very clearly. So what do you do? And they can't, what do you mean you've got different advice now? Well, because the situation changed, we learned something. But what do you mean? And they can't get it, right? They just don't. So you've got to, you deal with that group in a different way than this group. So that's not easy.
Right.
Hey, Lerone, I'm probably not pronouncing that right. You've got your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. So the process blades, they look as if they kind of are quite stable. They've been around since previous versions of Dyspn Agile. Not up to date with the most recent incarnation of it. But I'm looking at modern practices around interaction design, for example, design ops. If that were to kind of hit your radar, and of course does require integration into ways of working, from here of tensions between the UI UX people and the developers, or UI UX people and the Agile BAs or product owners for their sins. Do you foresee something like that emerging as a process blade? I'm thinking about that as a precedent for enterprise design potentially entering in as a process blade or superseding enterprise architecture.
Yeah, well, that's a good question. So enterprise design is actually on our list of potential blades. The challenge is there's a couple things, right? So some things end up being aspects throughout the blade. So for example, risk management doesn't appear as a blade, but it easily could. But instead, it's an aspect it's an aspect of a bunch of blades. So as a result, it's basically picked apart and placed in other spots where it belongs. And measurement as well is an example of that. Like easily, some sort of a measurement blade could be in theory added. I suspect though, so even though some aspects of enterprise design are very clearly in other parts of blades, I think there's enough of a couple issues, enough of a coordination effort there, which isn't the only thing that would justify it, but also some sort of, well, how do we tie it all together? And how do we surface it as an important thing that an organization should be considering? Now, is then the question from a process toolkit architecture point of view, is this the transformation blade? Because one of the things we've got going on right now, we've actually got 2 blades, one for transformation and one for continuous improvement, with the idea being the transformation gets to the point where you're actually doing continuous improvement properly. Enterprise design could land there or in between there, so that's one of those things where enterprise design would maybe bring some enterprise architecture stuff in, some transformation stuff in, some continuous improvement stuff in, certainly some UX-y stuff coming out of product development as well, or product management, I should say. So it's an interesting design issue. So this is one of those things that we've been bouncing the ideas around for a while within the IP team, that and other issues, but maybe it'll end up surfacing at some point. Maybe it won't. Hard to say.
Now there might be some linkages actually between what we call design challenges and the various aspects of your toolkit. Like you mentioned, transformation is one of, I would say, cluster of design challenges. Interesting one.
Yeah, well, and so we've actually built design into, so design right now is an aspect that goes throughout many parts of the toolkit. So it's one of those things where is it so important that we embed it throughout, or is it important, or is it something that needs to be surfaced and made explicit? So example, design thinking, we made explicit in the mindset when we captured that, because it wasn't explicit before. We'd embedded it all the way through, and people kept saying, well, why don't you talk about design at all? And say, are you kidding me? And so I bring up like several goal diagrams. Design technique, design technique, design technique, design technique, design technique, design technique, design technique. Oh, look over here. Design, 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 design. Oh, look over here. Design, design, design. What do you mean there's no design stuff in here? Come on, learn to read. But it's sometimes you've got to surface things to make it clear, and we hadn't. So we surfaced it a bit better, I hope.
Excellent, thanks.
So one more question from my side. You're now part from the PMI, and I'm sure plenty of people have asked you this question. So because some people consider project management as totally old school, and I know that we have people in our network too that don't really believe that this more waterfall, project management. If you say I'm a project manager, people say, "Ah, you're old school because now we are agile." So that's a bit of a black-white thinking. So what does it mean that disciplined agile and you're with this agile and progressive mindset is now part of something that is really has been around for decades and is really one of the most major disciplines? I know their stuff is really major, and what does this combination mean, and what does it mean for, and you're a member of the intersection group, so can we find any synergies?
Yeah, well, I think so. First of all, projects are here to stay, so like it or not. So for example, so in DA we talk about how some teams are project teams, some teams are product teams, right? So in the software world, there's this movement from projects to products because that's appropriate for a lot of teams, right? So if I'm working on a long-term product, then it doesn't really make sense to have that as a short-term project. Because the Microsoft Word team, for example, has been around for decades, and it will probably be around for decades, and they just continue to spew out software, and good for them. So that's not a project, nor never. Maybe the first release was back in the 80s or whenever they started it, but certainly not now. So we need to recognize that, but still projects are occurring. So for example, there's the Mars Surveyor robot. That was a project to getting it to Mars. I've met people on that team. That was a project. Now, when it's on Mars, now they're in operational mode. Well, they were operational mode, was flying, getting to Mars. But that was one heck of a project in order to get that, get that half-ton or 1-ton device landing safely on Mars. That was one heck of a project. But now they're in operational mode, right? They're gathering data and doing science and all that sort of stuff. So the point to be made is that we need to recognize we're really doing endeavors, and some of those endeavors are better captured as projects, and some of them are not, and fair enough. Some of the endeavors are experiments that never, maybe something comes of it, maybe something doesn't. Who knows? So there's that. So I think before DA, PMI was doing Agile and was moving that direction, and buying DA certainly accelerated that. So I think that's a very good thing. So I think PMI's pragmatic, right? But at the same time, there are still very traditional projects underway, right? In the construction area, for example, they're hybrid, but they're more leaning towards serial traditional stuff than they are towards lean Agile stuff, right? So different types of efforts and different types of endeavors need different types of ways of working, and that's fine. So, and what's also interesting is that PMI has been actively evolving into an association of associations. So we are actively working with other groups to bring their knowledge into, and to share knowledge, and to develop products or IP in most cases to market. PMI, we've been working with ANSI for years, for example. We're working with other associations as well. We've got some good stuff going on in the transformation space and in the citizen development space with the low code, no code vendors. So there's some really cool stuff going on, and I think this is the future of a lot of groups where we just getting back to that big hex diagram. You really can't focus just on one hex or one or two hexes and be meaningful anymore, because we're all interconnected, and we do need to intersect, and we do need to learn from each other and work together, because the world is too complex, right, to not do that. So in the IT space, we talk about building systems of systems and the Internet of Things and stuff like that. But I would argue the same concept applies in the IP space, or in the knowledge space, or whatever you want to call this space that we're in, where we've got different groups of people working together, sharing knowledge, sharing viewpoints in order to achieve something far better than they could have achieved by themselves, and improving far better, or at least far more effectively than they could have done by themselves, right? Because you can always learn something from some, and particularly from somebody who is very different, has very different background than what you do, because they'll come to the table with different expectations than you will, and you've got to work it through, and it tends to be a much better experience for everybody involved.
Yeah, and as Chris Potts explained in our last Campfire talk, and we want to include some of his tools to the intersection toolkit, and one of those tools is connecting goals with project portfolios. His message was clear last time, that we must start to manage goal portfolios and invest in goals, and not have projects as the primary asset what you do portfolio management for. And so I think there could be some synergies, and maybe we find a way to connect the PMBOK with intersection someday. Yeah, that's also a vision.
Yeah, and to be fair, so if you actually look at the portfolio management standard, it was never about project. It was never just about projects. Now, certainly the things can always improve and get better, but I think one of the and I'll blame the tool vendors for this, for mostly, because the tool, it's pretty easy to build tools for project management and program management when a program is a collection of projects, and portfolio management when a portfolio is a collection of projects and programs. That's a heck of a lot easier to build tools for than the more robust definition of what those things are actually all about. And I think so what's happened is the tool vendors have in many ways narrowed the discussion. And then as a result, because people learn the tools, a lot of people, they just tell me what tool to use, right? I'm sure you've heard that before. So when you use a specific tool, then you only know how to use that tool. So if you think you're using a portfolio management tool, for example, you're learning portfolio management as they've implemented it. But if they haven't implemented, large swaths of what portfolio management is actually all about, you'll never learn it if you just know the tools. And I think that's that I think is a serious challenge that we've got, is do people have the background to understand what they're doing? And that's easier said than done, right? Because the knowledge base is constantly changing and shifting as the environment shifts. So we have to be constantly learning. We have to be constantly trying to improve and realize, so for example, I recently certed again on data warehousing. I earned my Data Vault 2 certification finally, and learned a lot of stuff. I've been doing data warehousing for 30 some odd years. And it's always been a passion of mine, but things have changed, particularly in the last couple of years. Things have gotten, very, the dealing with scaling and stuff like that has gotten very interesting finally in the data community. And they're far more agile than they were like even just 5 years ago. So a lot of really good stuff has been happening there. And so, and I chose to invest some effort in doing that. To force me to get back up to speed on some more modern techniques. I think, and I would say the same thing in portfolio management. Like if you've been doing portfolio management for 20 years, you've probably missed a few things that have occurred in the last 5 years, including Chris's work, particularly Chris. Yeah.
Okay. And then there's a question by Lyron again. So maybe this is the final, or maybe we have time for 1 or 2 questions. But so Lyron, I think you raise your hand.
Yeah. So just on the choice of project versus, I'm reticent to call it product now, but let's use that as a dirty word. And the concept of team. Do you have a view that the fundamental nature of the word team and what it meant, let's say 15, 20 years ago, in whatever system was used, and the way team is used now in the various frameworks, apart from yours, or maybe including yours, of course, as the toolkit, means?
Yeah, so this is something we struggle with terminology a lot because we try to be agnostic, and we're as agnostic as we can be. And so terminology is always a big thing for us because you've got to be very careful whose terms you use and whose definitions of a given term you use. And we do our best to manage that, but it's tough. So we often use the word team because of this very issue of, is it this long-standing services product team thing? Is it this project team group, whatever, right? Is it a more of some sort of tribe-ish group of people that sort of get together and, they learn from each other and they do a certain job function thing? There's many different ways that you can define a team, and many different things you can look at, like time and membership, and how is it synchronous or asynchronous, and look at the communication styles and the interaction styles, right? So there's a lot of stuff going on there. So team is a reasonably nebulous concept in many ways, particularly in the last year or so, where remote teaming has become phenomenally common. That's really forced a lot of issues and forced a lot of organizations to rethink who their teams are. I think it's going to be really interesting when we try to motivate people to go back to the office. And we'll see how that all plays out, because some people will love to go back. Some people will, well, they'll leave their organization instead of going back to your office. Anything in between there. So we really need to. So in DA, we work through multiple teaming, potential teaming structures, and help you to choose whatever's appropriate for you. But yeah, I think as an organization, I would want to explore what we actually mean by teams, or certainly as a team, would want to explore what I mean by, what is our team? So for example, like earlier I was talking about, my team is basically the IP team, or the DA IP team, but we work with others on a very regular basis who I would, depending on the time of day, I would consider part of my team, even though they don't report to me. They probably will never report to me, but we interact constantly, and we have to work. We just have to collaborate. It is what it is. And actually, well, just today, I thought somebody was on my team that wasn't on my team, and almost did some paperwork that would not have been appropriate for me. And the HR people said, "Hey, Scott, that's not on your team. What the heck are you doing?" Wait a minute. Yeah, he's been on my team for a year and a half. Oh, he doesn't report to me? Oh, that's nice to know. Not that it matters, we're all grown-ups. But yeah, I was, oh yeah, you're right. Yeah, we need to officially transfer him over. I thought that got done. But it didn't happen. So it hasn't happened yet. So that's okay. But yeah, so the concept of a team is nebulous, and it changes. And so earlier I was talking about the Microsoft Word team. Well, what does that mean, right? So that's a team of teams, of people working across the planet. I'm sure some of them are, so say like 2 years ago when we're all maybe going to offices, some of that team was in Redmond. Some of them were working probably somewhere else in the world, or working from home because the traffic's horrible. But that was really a team of teams, and who's at any given point in time, who's on the Microsoft Word team. I bet you they don't know, and I bet you they don't care, because it doesn't really matter, except for maybe from as long as everybody's getting paid and they're all happy, and I'm sure that matters. But yeah, who's on my team right now? I'm not sure. Doesn't matter. I don't know.
All right.
Who knows?
We are running out of time a bit, so no more questions. No. Okay. So yeah. So thank you very much, Scott. It was really a pleasure, and you made for me, this was the quote of the day, and I will put it to the wiki. So for me, that the quote of the day was, business agility people should learn enterprise design skills, and we want to teach them. That's also the architectural thinking idea, because we believe that it's possible to bring some of the tools to them and to the organization, and enterprise practitioners must be willing to make their hands dirty in real world projects, or something like that, what you said. And I think this was a clear message. Yeah. So thank you very much. It was a pleasure. The recording will be available shortly, and at the wiki and so on. And we invite you to the next Campfire session in June, end of June. So it's June 30th, I think it is. If somebody has a speaker or wants to give a talk, please message me. We are searching for a speaker, but we want to do this Campfire talks monthly. So once again, thank you, Scott. It was a pleasure. And for everybody, have a nice day or evening or night, and see you soon. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, God.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Have a great day, everybody.